welcome to COVID and Cancer. This is a series on virtual flower arranging. And the way we got the idea for this session is that, especially with the pandemic numbers, still high, and in addition to COVID, there's influenza, and there's RSV, and there's norovirus, and there's all sorts of germs and cooties going around. A lot of people are turning to alternative forms of holiday celebrations, not necessarily the big parties, but more intimate gatherings in homes, and even over Zoom. And I reached out to Samantha a while ago. We've had this in the works for quite a long time. And we talked about, to give people some tips, even for flower arranging yourself on any budget. And Samantha Maranca is from the Mini Rose, and her website's awesome, and she's awesome and responsive, and just, I feel very lucky we connected with her, and we'll be turning this over to her. As she said earlier, if you have any questions, while she's kind of doing her thing, I can also monitor. You can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat, you can kind of just, physically, wave your hand and get my attention. But Samantha, thank you so much for donating your time. I'm sure this is a really busy time of year for you. So we're thrilled that you're here, and I'm so excited. I just was in the chemo area, and I said to some of the staff, I have to run. Have a group now. And they said, what's it about? I said, virtual flower arranging. And they all said, we want your job. It was very funny. So you have a great job. So
thank you so much. Compared to what you do, I'm fun and games. So you're the real hero here, and all of you strong women that are going through this battle. I also unfortunately found out that my very best friend was diagnosed a week ago with breast cancer. So I am now personally going through this experience as her support. So in the merit of her healing and all of your healing, I hope that this is a really uplifting workshop for everybody. And it's a real pleasure of mine to be able to do this and give a little bit of my wealth of knowledge and experience and a little bit of joy. We started doing these workshops virtually at the beginning of the pandemic. Before then, it was just, a bunch of people around a table in my workshop or an office or a party or things like that. And one of the surprises of the pandemic in the beginning is we needed to really figure out how, as a small business and a small business located in Manhattan, we were really shut down, and how were we going to stay relevant, stay in business, keep our employees staffed, all of that. And thankfully, we were able to work with our vendors and be able to provide flowers that we can ship to you. If you wanted flowers to play around and do on your own, that's a wonderful thing. But it's been able to give us more of a nationwide platform. And so we've been able to do hundreds of these workshops over the past, several years. But especially during COVID, it's been a real godsend to us to be able to reach people kind of on a much broader and wider spectrum as well. So I hope you really enjoy it. Please, I'm sorry that my audio is a little bit low on receiving. So if you have any questions, wave your hands wildly, type it in. I will see and I will get to it for sure. Couple of things before I really kick into the fun stuff. My name's Samantha Maranca. I should start there. Owner of the Mini Rose Company. We're a New York City based floral company. But as I said to a few of you who are in earlier, my home is based in Bucks County. We moved in the beginning of the pandemic, and we work in the tri-state area and virtually beyond. So that's what we do. And I work for many years. I kind of fell into flowers. It was almost by accident. My background before I became a florist was in interior design and in visual merchandising. So I did a lot of design of spaces and how people experience spaces. And but I really loved the hands-on work, and I didn't want to work a desk job where I was designing something on paper. So when I graduated with my bachelor's degree in interior design, I was looking to kind of combine my work experience and my educational experience. And I happened to find flowers really completely by accident, because every week I would go to my parents. I was, during the end of college, just out of college, and I would go to their house for a weekly dinner, and I would bring flowers. And I realized that when you're trying to put flowers in a vase, and I'm going, I'm a designer. I just got a degree in design and all this. You figure you throw it in a vase, it's going to look like a, 18th century painting. It does not. So the challenge in like real life tactile, just trying to put together a vase of flowers for my parents every week and pick out, what do you pick out? And what's this? And what's that? And I realized how much I didn't know about flowers. And I became curious, and I was getting ready to move to New York City from Philadelphia. And all that had ever really been on my radar was really like 1-800-Flowers or mom and pop shops and these little like kind of corner stores. It wasn't real kind of well curated design, high-end design. So when I started really looking into the business and the industry, I was amazed at not only the scope of work and the amount of work and the quality of work, but also how many different ways the floral industry interacts with all of the other industries. So we do a lot of stuff. We do gifting, we do events, we do parties, all of that kind of stuff. We do workshops. We also do a lot of corporate. We do landscaping. We do holiday decor. We're in retail spaces. So as a business, you realize how much things that are living changes the environment of a space, and it changes people's energy. And that brings me back to you, and that, you, as you go through this, monumental time in your life where things are hard, you cannot be feeling well or need to be at home more, especially because of COVID and everything that's going around with illnesses and stuff like that, to have little ways to bring light and joy and creativity and beauty into your home, into your space, and into your atmosphere is really, truly beneficial. And we've seen this, especially during COVID, that a lot of people got into gardening, got into flowers, got into, knitting and crocheting, different ways to bring creative arts into their space. And especially flowers physiologically bring a lot of positive well-being to people's health. So that's my intro. There's a couple things that I want you to gain from this experience. I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you what the different flowers are that I selected, why I selected them. For all of these workshops, I try to pick some things that you've seen before, but maybe not the way you've seen it before, and then have some things that you've seen all the time and some things that you've never seen before, and you go like, wow, that's even a thing. And so just tell you a little bit about that and give you an idea of how do I select as a professional different flowers that are going to go into this vase. I'm going to teach you a little bit on how to condition the flowers, which is a big thing. A lot of people say like, oh, I love hydrangea, but every time I get them, they die the next day. My first question is, what temperature water did you put them in? They go like, what do you mean? How did you cut them? Some of these things have a real effect on the flowers. Did you clean the leaves off? Things like that. So I'm going to go through that in the beginning part. And then I'm going to show you as I put together a beautiful centerpiece myself. I'll put that together and I'll explain how I'm layering, how you build a base for an arrangement so that you can get creative and play. And honestly, I go out in my yard and I'll cut branches off a holly tree, and you look for things that you have. Tangerines in your fridge, you could stick in an arrangement and things like that. How do you get creative with the things that you have so that when you go to the store, you can get one or two things and go like, oh, I've got some of this foliage outside, or, things like that, orange slices that I can dry and do in the arrangement. Things that are really fun and unique and interesting. So just to give you a little bit of self-confidence that you have a baseline to go outside of then your comfort zone. So I'm going to get started. The first flower that I'm going to clean and condition are these roses. You are not seeing improperly. They are like caramel colored roses. They're like really truly brown, like taupey color. It's one of my favorites, especially for the holiday season, because it's a neutral, but it can lend itself to other colors in a way that's really beautiful and unique. So this is a really high-end rose. Once again, I love it for the holidays, but it's also really cool and interesting. You might go and see a certain color lavender rose. People will say like, oh, red roses. And they think there's like 2 or 3 kinds of red roses. There might be like 4 or 5 dozen types of red roses. Each one has a name. Each one is bred and farmed specifically. They have different shapes of petals, things like that. The first thing that I'm going to do with my roses, as you see, is I'm going to clean off all of the leaves. These thankfully are not too thorny, just for my fingers' sake, but I would snap off or cut off any of the thorns at this point as well. The reason why I'm going to clean off all of the leaves is two, maybe threefold. Let's start with two and see where I get. So the first is that any of these flowers, I'm going to be cutting these and putting them in a low vase in a mixed arrangement. Now, if you're getting just a dozen roses, you might want to keep a top, maybe 2 leaves on your stem, just so you have a little bit of foliage around the top of the vase, but you never, ever, ever want to have leaves under the water line or inside the vase. A, it looks messy. B, anytime that you have submerged organic material underwater, it's going to decompose and rot much faster than it would be in air. So like, for instance, if I have this and it's got leaves on it, the leaves are going to last, 3, 4, 5 days before they start kind of wilting and stuff like that. If I stick them under the water within the day, they're going to be really kind of water filled and murky. They're going to start getting, the water's going to start getting swampy and it gets bacteria. Think about if you have a dog or a cat, you're going to refresh your dog and cat water bowl every day, because by the second day, it's got some, hair on the top and gook. By the second day, it's already drank down quite a bit and it's getting gross. By the third, fourth day, it's really looking bad. So the more stuff that you have submerged under that water line, the faster it's going to get, kind of like rotty and murky. So in order to keep the water fresh and clean and your flowers healthy, you always want to clean off anything that's under the water line. The other thing is that if you take a flower, I'm going to cut it at the bottom, and the water is coming up through the bottom of the stem, up. And what's it going to hit first? This bottom leaf, and then this leaf, and then this leaf, and then this leaf, and it's going to go up and up and up, and finally it'll hit the head of the flower. But we want the head of the flower to be getting as much water as it needs. And sometimes it's not drinking enough, especially with flowers like hydrangea, really big-headed flowers, especially with thicker, woodier stems, like hydrangea, roses, lilacs, any kind of blooming branches. The thicker the stem, the more water the flowers typically need. So the more you're going to want to clean off any of that extra foliage, because it will suck up the water, and then you're not going to be getting enough at the top of the head. So that's a great thing as far as keeping your flowers hydrated. Make sure to clean them first. The next thing that we're going to do is, I've got enough here to cleaned off, so I'm gonna switch on this. But the next thing we want to do is always make sure we're cutting our flowers on a diagonal. So for instance, if I cut my flower and I just do it straight like this, the diameter of that cut stem, sorry, the camera's a little bit far away, but the diameter of it is going to be just the width of that flower stem. Now, if I cut it on a sharp angle, I'm going to be getting a lot more diameter on the bottom of that stem for my flower to be drinking water through. So that's just another trick. The other thing is that what is the temperature of water that you want? So as I said before, the thicker the stem, the more that they need water. Also, typically, as a rule, the hotter the water should be. So hydrangea, viburnum, lilac, blooming branches, anything that is a thick, woody stem. If you have rhododendron in your yard and you're cutting rhododendron, you want that water to be nice and hot. Roses, especially if you get roses from the store and you realize that they're a little soft and a little droopy, this is a pretty thick stem. It's not as thick as hydrangea, but it's got a pretty kind of dense amount to it. You can give this a cut, stick it in hot water. It shouldn't be burning like you put it on the kettle, but you can go pretty hot with it. And if you leave them wrapped up, if they're a little bit softer, leave them wrapped up and they'll rehydrate and perk back up while they're wrapped up. And you can leave them wrapped up for like an hour or so. That'll really help to rehydrate. Then on the flip side, the softer the flower stems or things like bulbed flowers, tulips, daffodils, paper whites, anything like that, those are going to be really heat sensitive. So you're going to want to do cold water for them. it's not that the hot water will kill them, but it's going to make them go through their life cycle much faster. And because they're much more sensitive to heat, they will, like a tulip, if you have a really tight tulips and you put them in warm water, give it like 20 minutes, they're going to be like whoosh and blow right open. You know, peonies is another thing like that. That's an early spring flower. As soon as it gets warm out, they all pop right open. So just understanding the difference between that, and that might be something that you can Google as well if you don't know specifically, but the bulbs and the like that early season kind of flower being, you know, softer stems, thinner stems being more cool water, and then the hardier winter flowers with the thicker stems being hot water is typically a very good gauge. So I'm going to give all my roses, now that I've cleaned them, I'm going to give them a fresh cut. I'm doing it on a diagonal. I'm going to stick them back in water because I'm not quite ready to use them yet. And the more amount of time that I leave them out of water, the more that this seal that I just cut a fresh opening in those roses, the more amount of time that they're out of water once I've cut them, the more that it starts to seal up, almost like a scab. If you have a fresh open wound, it's open. It's, you know, anything's coming in, going out, whatever, anything like that. The more that you have time that it starts to seal over, the less that you're going to be having, you know, bleeding. Same thing with the water. You want the water to be going in. It's going to be scabbing over. It's not going to be going in the same way and drinking the same way. So you just want a really nice fresh cut for any of your flowers when you put them in water. I have calla lilies here, which are beautiful white calla lilies. These are generally relatively simple to condition. Same thing, you want to just give it a cut at the bottom. The one thing about calla lilies that's interesting and tricky is that you want to make sure that you don't have too much water in the vase. This is honestly even a little bit more than I would regularly put. I would probably put about 3 or 4 inches of water in a vase this high for calla lilies. The reason is that these stems get waterlogged. So if you fill it up so that the stems are completely submerged, the stems will actually kind of like decompose and disintegrate. It's really disgusting, just so you know. It's like a mucus. It's horrible. There's nothing worse than picking up like oversaturated calla lilies because it literally just like drips with like goopy goo and rots. So that's one flower that you want to make sure you're not submerging in water too much. Now I'm going to be putting that in a mixed arrangement, so it will be fine because it's going to be supported with the other flowers. It's not going to get waterlogged in the stem. But if I was doing just a vase of calla lilies, I would keep my my water level low. We've got our Ranunculus. Now these are a really, really amazing, funky. I had to get them. I saw them. I said, oh, with the toffee rose and the kumquats that I have over here, I was like, these are really special, and I want to show you something. Ranunculus are in season right now, and they're also in season in the spring. They come out of different parts of the world from here to then, but they're coming right now out of like New Zealand and Holland. And these are just these really incredible ruffled ranunculus. They look almost cabbagey. These are really easy. There's not even any greens on these, so I don't need to clean them up. But if there are, you just clean them, give them a trim, put them in water. Then I've got kumquats on the stem. You can also do citrus if you want to do something that's fun like this. You can do pomegranates, you can do little tangerines, you can do persimmons, you can do figs, all kinds of things. These are sold on the branch still, which makes it easier for florists. Otherwise, you can take a little kind of stick or a wire and you can wire them in. So I'll show you how to do that later. These are easy as well. I'm just going to add them in as a nice accent. I wanted everything to be kind of festive and holiday, but it's also very muted and neutral. It would be great for Hanukkah, for Christmas, for just a birthday, for Kwanzaa, whatever it is. It's not too, you can do holiday and not have it be all red and green and stuff as well. So just keeping in mind the things that are seasonal, you can also kind of lean in different directions.
And Samantha, can
Last
you just
couple of things I have is this is seeded eucalyptus, which is a type of eucalyptus, but as you see, it just has these cool little seedy berries on the end. This is one of my favorite accents. I use it as a foliage a lot of the time. It adds a really nice texture. It goes with everything. There was the first year of COVID, we could not find seeded eucalyptus that was nice anywhere. And when it came back in, I feel like my team and I had like PTSD, where every time we saw nice seeded eucalyptus, like we didn't even need to have orders. No, we had nothing to use, and we'd be like, just get a bunch. Because it was so, for a year we were like, oh, what do we do without our seeded eucalyptus? And then I took some of this beautiful juniper. This is off of branch. As I said, you can get holly in this time of year. There's all kinds of cool evergreens and junipers and things like that. Cut some branches, you clean off the bottom, and it's some really beautiful foliage. And then I brought some pine cones that are already pre-sticked. These are actually glittered as well, but I always have on hand some like random pine cones, orange slices, and so if you end up having like my kids, we just got a new bag of like those little cutie tangerines, and the old ones were getting a little bit dry. Keep them to the side. They'll dry out and they'll shrink up a little bit, and you can take some sort of little stick, give it a cut on a diagonal so you have a little bit of a sharp end, and just stick it right in, and then you've got a cute little tangerine to put in your arrangement, so it doesn't have to go to waste, and they'll dry and it'll be perfect. So it'll end up being part of a dried arrangement. All right, so that's my intro. Does anyone have any questions? Now's a good time to interject before I get into the arrangement making.
I was actually wondering, Samantha, so where do you get your flowers from, and where do you suggest that people who want to try some of these techniques at home get their flowers from?
Absolutely. So we're located on 28th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue, which is the New York City Flower District, and has been the New York City Flower District for about 140 years. So I'm literally right upstairs. That's where my studio is. So as we get orders, we're not a retail store. So everything that we get for our clients, we literally go downstairs and get the freshest from the wholesalers, right off the flight, right off the truck, everything like that. So that's where I get my flowers. Some places at the flower market will sell to other people. Some places will not. What I would say is if I'm happy to ship you, we sell the groups of bunches like this in a bloom box. So if you wanted to get flowers and you said, it's a special occasion, it's my birthday, I need a pick me up or something like that, $150, we'll ship it straight to your door, deliver it straight to your door, and we hand select and curate. But if you go to the grocery store and you wanted to pick flowers, I'd say the best places typically that I find are either Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. And that's because they have they're big enough conglomerates that they have entire farms that are shipping to them, so they're able to get generally some really good and interesting product at lower costs than, like, for instance, certain grocery stores or bodegas or things like that. But you can find some nice stuff at bodegas also. I mean, like, once you know what to look for, then you can start kind of watching out for certain things better, and try and experience. You'll see this thing works well for me. This lasted a really long time, this doesn't. Some people will think, people have preconceived notions about certain flowers. Like, for instance, a lot of the time I'll add in a really cool and interesting either carnation or mum into my boxes, because people feel like, oh, that's like a cheap filler flower. And there are carnations and mums that are cheap filler flowers, and that's great. However, there's also some really high-end and really expensive and beautiful carnations, mums, things like that. And even things like baby's breath is becoming people are dyeing flowers in interesting ways. I've seen incredibly expensive installations of things where it's baby's breath and asparagus fern, and it just happens to all be dyed in an interesting way, in a different color. And you're going, we work for very high-end retail where you wouldn't have necessarily thought that would have been the direction versus, you know, if they did all orchids, but that's the look and that's the vibe. As the corner outside for flower food. So I'm going to tell you about changing the water and all of the care and stuff, but I will tell you this. I don't use any of the chemicals, the flower food in my arrangements. If you change the water regularly, and I will give you all the details of that towards the end. Once I have the arrangement, I'm going to show you how you switch the water without taking out the flowers from your arrangement, all of that kind of stuff. But when you do that regularly, and if you condition your flowers properly in the beginning, that's how you get longevity on your flowers. And I don't typically believe in adding chemicals where it's not needed, personally. But everyone's got an old wives' tale. Put a penny in it, put a drop of Clorox in it, put ice cubes in it. I've heard all kinds of things. And I'm not going to say any of it's wrong. Try it out and see. If it works well for you, that's great. But I just say change your water regularly, keep it in a cooler place if possible, and your flowers will do well. So,
and
yep.
Sorry, one other thing, in terms of basic supplies to have around, if you're going to be doing this at home, what are the things you think that people should, invest in? I mean, are regular scissors okay? Do you need, I saw you had more like clippers. I mean, what does
I have a pair of clippers. And this is something that you can also get through us if you wanted like a pair of like professional floral clippers. You can go to the hardware store and get a regular pair of like pruning clippers. There's some that are better and some that are not. You can do a sharp pair of scissors. You just want to make sure it's sharp. If you're doing like regular kind of paper scissors, it's going to be a mess and it's not going to be sharp enough, and you're not going to be able to get through some of the stems properly. So I definitely recommend that. And then a variety of different kinds of vases. I'm going to make a low and lush because I feel like people typically lean more towards like getting one thing and just sticking it in a tall vase because they don't know what to do with more or with shorter. And so I'm giving you an education on something that's a little bit lower. But I also say get a couple like smaller vases as well. Like I'm going to have more than enough flowers for this vase. If I have one flower here where the stem is too short and it's going to be too low in there, add it to a bud vase. You can put a couple little bud vase flowers on your bathroom and things like that. Just have a little bit of an assortment and a variety. But really the clippers is the main thing. And yeah, anything else? We have plenty more time for questions also. And I'm sure I'll cover a lot. Flowers are less fragrant. Okay. Lilies, I stay away from because I'm very fragrance sensitive. And like, if I have to do something with lilies, I will like have a migraine by the end of it. There's certain flowers in particular that are more fragrant. Lilies, paper whites this time of year, sweet peas have a fragrance, certain roses, but a lot of roses are not fragrant anymore. So I'd say like, if you're at the store, check and make sure, but I'd say lilies are like the biggest offender for me. But yes, there's plenty of flowers that do not have fragrance. Tulips, ranunculus, calla lilies, a lot of what I'm using today has no fragrance. Like this is not going to be a fragrant arrangement. Besides the evergreen is going to be the most fragrant thing in here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the most important part of how do you get started with an arrangement. And I've watched, as I said, I've done this class in person and virtually hundreds of times for thousands of people. And it's interesting because I've learned to see how are people starting and where do they get kind of lost along the way. And I've learned how to then steer you in the right direction. So the main thing is that you want to start with one type of flower that's going to be somewhat hardy and full as your base. And you don't need to use all of it as your base, but that first like 6 stems of flowers you put in your vase is going to be the most important. Why is that? Because if you do flowers, I'm going to use this for instance, if I have my flowers and I start like this, and I've got like 4 or 5 inches from the top of the vase, I'm always calculating from the top of the vase to the bottom of the head of the flower. So I've got like 4 or 5 inches here. If I started like that, this arrangement is going to be massive for the scale of the vase. So first and foremost, you want to make sure you have a vase that's appropriate to the amount of flowers that you have and the scale of the flowers that you have. So I have a whole mix here. So I could do something taller, but none of this is really tall. You know, none of this is big lilies. None of it's sunflowers or anything like that that needs a big, tall vase. So I'm doing a low and lush mix. Now, on the flip side, if I cut my flowers too short and there's no room between the bottom of the head and the top of the vase, then this arrangement's going to look like it fell into a sinkhole. And literally, there's sometimes that you go like, you've seen certain arrangements that even professionals, I walk by a certain store and you go like, it looks like it kind of fell in a little bit. It's like too squat, too tight for the scale of the vase. So you want something that's about in the middle. So for a low and lush arrangement about this size, I'm going to start with something. And so just as a note, the bigger the vase, the more space you're going to keep between the top of the vase and the bottom of the flower. But for something low and lush, what I typically do is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. And a rose is a really good flower because it's full, it's got body. You lay it down, it stays there. It doesn't kind of have its own. You don't want to start with something that's soft and delicate like a tulip or a sweet pea. You don't want to start with something like even a calla lily. Calla lilies, I always do either a tulip or a calla lily because both of them are like trick flowers. You know, they're tough. So calla lily has a direction. If I started with calla lilies, it's gonna already lean in wherever it wants to go, and it's gonna set the tone. Versus a rose, I'm gonna cut it, I'm gonna put it in, and it's gonna go where I want it to go because I'm laying it on the side. Great, here we go, and you can start to see even with just like 4 flowers, and I'm crisscrossing them. So they're going down into the vase. They're hitting the bottom of the vase. That's very important. You don't want to have your flowers. First of all, I don't have any floral foam in here, so it's not going to stand straight up. It's always going to lean against the side of the vase to start. Totally fine, totally appropriate. And you want to give yourself that 1.5, 1 inch of stem showing. It just is going to help create that scale. So as you can see right here, and this is a good spot, to stop and take a look, take a step back and see. Now that I have 5 stems, I literally only have 5 flowers in this vase so far. But if I'm going to kind of arch it up and over, is that look like it will be an appropriate scale for the vase that it's going in? And for me, I'm going to say yes. You can make it a little bit more wild and whimsical later on. You can make it very clustered and all the roses grouped together on one side and all of the calla lilies on another side. The style is irrelevant, but is the scale, am I starting with a base that's going to give me somewhere to start with? And with this, I'd say yes. So then, great, I've got 5 roses. I'm going to switch to something else. These ranunculus, because they're so big and so full, I'm going to use a couple of those next. And I'm just going to keep, and you obviously don't need a turntable. It's just easy for me and feels very professional for me to have, have my little lazy Susan to swirl around and show you from all angles. I don't have to keep picking up my vase and moving it around. But you want to make sure, because you're probably not going to have a lazy Susan, you want to make sure you take your vase and turn it as you go. You want your arrangement to look beautiful from all areas. It shouldn't have, unless you're going to put it on, let's say, a console table that is against a wall and you're only having it face forward, then fine, you can design it so that it's all face forward. But generally speaking, if you're putting this on a coffee table, if you're putting it on a dinner table, and you want someone to sit on the other side of the table, they don't want to be looking at the back of the arrangement. So keep that in mind as well. What's the space and the location that you're designing for? So now I've got like 8, 9 flowers in here. Okay, coming along. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to start adding in a little bit of greenery. It's going to give it just a little bit more body, and we can start layering with different things. Once you have 1 or 2 elements, you hit that like 10 flower, then you go, all right, I've got my base, I've got my shape. Now it's going to be layering in, and then as it layers in, it'll start to build towards the top. So all of the greenery, I'm going to clean off anything that's low enough that would be under the water line. So I didn't do that with everything because you want to make sure you can make the most out of it. But I'm going to start kind of coming in like here. I've got one piece and it's kind of got two little sprouts. So I'm going to cut this sprout over here so that I can do a smaller stem. I can clean this up a little bit and I can use that. And there's certain flowers like the seeded eucalyptus that you'll see you can do that more and more. And then I've got this area, which I cut off. And this one's really long and sprawly. I'm going to keep it part way and I'm going to just trim off a little bit of the end so it's not too long. And I'm just starting to layer in around the base. I'm going to do one or two more and then I'm going to switch to something else. You just kind of keep layering on. But once again, you're starting with the hardiest elements, the things that have the most kind of shape and mass in their own right. And then as you get to the end, you start to do the things that are a little bit more fragile or delicate or have more direction to them. I'm going to add a couple more roses now because now I have a little bit more greenery in there. I can come in and start adding my roses and they'll start standing up a little bit higher because I've got body now that it'll stand up here. It's not going to just lay on the sides anymore. So that's what you're really creating. You're creating this crisscross with those first like 8-10 flowers. Then you start adding a little bit of layers of greenery in, and then you come in and you start layering in some more in the middle. Great. Now I'm going to take a piece of this seeded eucalyptus, my favorite. I have one piece that's like to die for over here. So I'm going to show you, this is one stem, okay? But I'm going to take this one stem and it's going to be enough for this whole arrangement. And then I can use all of this that came for the rest of the bunch. I'll use that for something else. This also dries beautifully. You can use it on a wreath. It'll dry. You can do it in flowers, then take out the water at the end. This will dry beautifully. So once again, you've got a stem, you've got a big chunk at the top, and then you've got one. I'm going to just pull it off like this, right where it splits. 2, 3, and I'm going to trim this one, but I'm going to get from this one stem 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stems of seeded eucalyptus. So also keep that in mind. If you have a magnolia tree outside, great, grab a branch of magnolia. You can cut that into 3, 4 pieces. I'm going to take the biggest one first, and I'm going to kind of stick that down and in the middle, or kind of up and in the middle a little bit so that it starts to fill in that middle space a little bit more. And then I'm going to come through. Once again, I'm cleaning off any of the foliage that's around the bottom, closer to the bottom of the stems, so that it doesn't end up submerged under the water. So I'm just going to do 3 stems because it doesn't need to be too crazy at the moment. We still have a lot of flowers, but this is where you can also start tucking in on that underneath. You can start seeing, oh, I can still see some of those whole, like a little gap where the stem is. Perfect. Now's a good time. I can come in and kind of add and layer that in so it's a little lower and a little bit fuller. I'm going to even leave this to the side. Next, I'm going to come back in. I'm going to add some more ranunculus. And these, now is a good time also. You can start going a little bit higher and a little bit lower. You can do an arrangement that's more kind of rounded if you want and tight. You can also come in and do one here and then take another one and go a little bit further out, and it gives a little bit of depth and dimension. I also have this little ranunculus bud. It's just a kind of tiny, not open stem. I can have that coming out of the side as well. Got to get it in the vase though. Perfect. Couple more roses. And as you see, I'm layering. The outside looks great. The middle still has a huge gaping hole. And there's some areas that need a little fill in also. But it's just making sure you have, and it doesn't have to be this many elements. I've got 6 elements here. Fine, I'm giving you a well-rounded. You can do this with 3 elements. You can buy two and then use a branch that you have in your yard, or use the orange, take an orange and do slices and dry them out and wire those in. You can get creative. Pine cones. I take my kids for walks, and we'll go and pick up like all of the little acorn things and those weird kind of seed pod stuff, and we'll put those into an arrangement or make a leaf bouquet. And some of it's really cool and interesting. So just kind of thinking outside of the box. You'd be amazed at what they sell at the flower district. Amazed. I mean, like some things that are like literal weeds and things that you see on the side of the highway and old dead branches and stuff like that. And people pay good money, I mean, really good money for it, because it's all nature, it's all beautiful. So it's just how you utilize it that some people have the vision to incorporate it in a way that's interesting, and other people would look at it and think it's trash or lawn debris. Now I'm going to add some of my kumquats. Just so you know, kumquats are my favorite personally. They were in my bridal bouquet and my wedding. So I have a little bit of a thing for kumquats, and I've never been able to go in the flower market and see a nice bunch of kumquats and not get them. It's kind of like what happened with the seeded eucalyptus, but it feels a little bit more romantic to me because it's related to my wedding. And I'm just putting those in. It adds a little bit. It's got some foliage that's a little bit of a different texture. It's got the fruit on it that's beautiful. It's a pop of something that's a little bit more bright and fresh. It's got a different texture to it. And I'm just going to keep going around and add a little bit here, a little bit there. Some in the top, some in the bottom. This is another good thing to kind of use to tuck in those bottom areas. All right, now I'm going to go for the calla lilies. So this is one of the things, there's not a lot of flowers that have a very specific direction. Tulips can, but calla lilies have almost like this fountain. And what's important, because you will get in trouble very easily with calla lilies if you don't understand the natural flow and shape of just how things go in nature. Water will always flow out of a fountain. It'll always go like this. Flowers always grow towards the sun. When you're making a flower arrangement, you are the sun. So the flower should always, whatever way I'm looking at this arrangement, it should look like the front. It should be looking at me from that side. This side should be looking at you if you're standing on that side, but it should always be growing out of the vase like it would if it was growing naturally in the environment. Otherwise, it's going to look, there's certain florists that do very like architectural, let's call it modern, where it's very formed. But that's not what I'm teaching. I'm not teaching you, like Ikebana. I'm teaching you how do you make something that feels really lush and flows in a way that's very natural and beautiful. So in particular, this is a perfect calla lily because the flow is this way, but the stem is bent this way. So it's actually very tricky. But one of the cool things about calla lilies, and the reason why you see a lot of calla lilies in those very modern kind of like loops and hoop arrangements, is because the stems are malleable. You pinch it between your thumb and your forefinger, and you squeeze it as you just slide your fingers down, and you can literally straighten the stem to the shape that you want it. I'm going to do it one more time. But I took a stem that was very crooked, and I'm literally just massaging it so that now it's pretty straight. And then when I go to put this in my vase, because if the stem is kind of going in a different shape or a different direction than the flow, it's going to be hard to get in the vase where it goes the way you want it to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this in the arrangement, and I want it to flow like it's flowing out of the vessel. I'm going to do it again this way. I cut this down. I'm going to make sure the stem is going the direction that I want it to. I'm actually going to do this as a little bit more of a grouping and do two of these calla lilies together. And I'm going to place this coming in and flowing out so that it's flowing out this side. It's on this side, so it's going to flow out that side. Then I'm going to come over to this side. I might have this a little more up and in the middle. Doesn't all have to be symmetrical. Symmetrical isn't nature. So it's fine if you do like something that's very specific. You have a rose here, a rose here, a rose here, a rose here, and you have a calla lily in between. That's fine. But in nature, that's not how things go. So if you keep it a little bit more loose and whimsical, that's fine, as long as the shape is going in the way that it's supposed to. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Great. So I'm going to add a couple more of these. And I'm close to the end. I'm going to add a couple of pine cones at the end. But let's start talking about how do you keep your flowers alive? We're talking about that. How often do you change the water? How do you keep them alive? So this is very important because obviously you spent all of this time making a beautiful arrangement. You want to enjoy it as long as possible. So you want to change the water in your flowers. I'd say change it completely, not add. I'd say every 2 to 3 days. Every 1 to 2 days, you want to add water. So you want to make sure that the entire vessel gets completely fresh water 2 to 3 days, and you can fill it up in between if need be, because that water is going to drink down. And depending on what the flower is, some flowers drink a pretty good amount of water. Once again, hydrangea is a good culprit of that. You'll go into a hydrangea arrangement and it'll drink half the day's worth of water down in a day. So if you don't refill that, you're going to have stems that are out of the water by day 2. So it's just keeping in mind the mindfulness of what does that flower need. And then you have flowers like carnations and mums, which are very hardy flowers that, they could sit there for 2 weeks and you don't touch them and they're fine, honestly. But generally speaking, your flowers will do better and will hold up longer if you keep the water fresh and if you keep them in cooler temperatures. Like, don't ever put flowers on a heater. That's not a great call. People will sometimes people say, I've gotten pictures before that's like, my flowers died the next day and it's sitting on a heater, and you go it's not going to do well. So the cooler the space, flowers, there's a reason why we keep flowers in a cooler at 45 degrees, because it will literally pause their opening process for them to be in a cooler space like that. So the cooler the space is, up to a certain level, obviously not below freezing, but up to a certain level, it will give it more and more longevity. So then I'm going to come in with a couple of my little pine cone accents just to be festive. I'm going to add 2 or 3. And just find a little spot that you want. You can do some a little bit tighter and a little bit more in. You can do some a little bit further out. As I said, you want it to look natural, and nature isn't always precise. So it's fine if it's not exactly separated and evened out. You don't need to come with a measuring tape to do flowers. You want to get a little bit more like hippy dippy and take your shoes off and put some, put some good music on. That's more, get a glass of wine. Perfect. That's how you get into the flower mode. Because the truth is, these are living things. You're in their world. Like, I'm manipulating their world, but they're not going to be anything but what they are. So I need to understand their nature, their needs, their flow in order to, it sounds a little hippie, but it's really true. There are times that me and my designer who I've been working with for 8 years side by side, and we're basically married, and we'll come in and I'll be doing something and I go like, this is not working for me. And I'll step aside, she'll do it, and it's like perfection. And you're just like learning the right jive. Like, sometimes your mojo's off a little bit. You got to take a step back, have a glass of wine, or put on some music, or come back 20 minutes later and you can do it. So that's the definitely in different cultures and different societies and throughout history and stuff like that. Absolutely. I am terribly unversed in that.
Okay.
So I can't personally speak to any of it in as personal, like, this is what this means and that's what that means. I come at it more from a place of like, you know, everything alive has intrinsic beauty and brings its own energy and its own unique vibe, whether it's texture, whether it's color, whether it's scent, whether it's the movement of it. Everything has its own kind of spirit and life force to it. These are living things. So for me, there's definitely, the answer is yes, absolutely. However, I come at it more from, how do I make something that is beautiful and unique and gives voice to whatever I want to make right now in this moment, or for that specific occasion or event or whatever it is. Like, that's more how I emotionally connect to flowers versus like a yellow rose means friendship and this means, that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely that throughout different cultures and stuff. So
thank you.
That answers your question.
Mm-hmm.
Let me show you real quick. How do you change the water in the vase, right? That's the important thing, because you go like, if I picked this up and I took the flowers out and I put them on the desk and I went to change the water, I came back and I tried to put them back in, there's a 0% chance those flowers are going back in looking the way they came out. 0. So how do you do it? There's 2 ways. There's one, the first one I'm going to show you is if you're by yourself. So if you're by yourself and you don't have a second set of hands to assist you, now I'm going to get into all of my like funny metaphors. So you, I think everyone's women here. You're maybe mothers, maybe grandmothers, you maybe babysat, you have a niece or a nephew or anything like that. If you've ever held a newborn baby, you know that they've got that like floppy neck situation that you've got to support the chin. That's the first thing with a newborn baby. You support under the chin. Okay. This is your newborn baby. You're holding this baby. And what you're going to do is take your hand. You're not grabbing it. You're not choking it, nothing. You're just gently supporting the chin under one side. While you do that, you tip, 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 tip over the sink. If I did it right now, I'd have water all over my table. But you're going to tip, tip, tip over the sink, pour out all of your water. Your hand is going to support this arrangement so that the flowers don't go anywhere. When the vase is empty, you put it back down and you either go under the faucet, you can take a watering can, you can take a water bottle, however you want to do it, and you fill it back up to the top. But that way, the flowers never leave the vase. Ever. So you have no issue of them sliding out. So that's the like newborn baby little chin support method. Now, if you have another person to help you, what you do is you pretend you're a bride on her wedding day, and you take your hands around the base of the vase. And I have very small hands. I'm 5 foot tall, so I have tiny hands. I'm now holding this arrangement like it's I'm a bride. My other person is going to come in, pick this vase up, pour out the water, get fresh water, bring it back to me, and then bonus points if they pick up the clippers and give a fresh cut at the bottom. That's like bonus. You go, great. And then they can help you just tuck your flowers back in. And once again, looks like it never left the vase, correct?
Gorgeous.
So here's my last thing. This is my trick of the trade, and there's no science behind it. I made it up. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. There's no science behind it whatsoever. This is completely out of my own head, but I'm going to call this, as women, the last thing, I got my hair done last week. The last thing they do, you do the color, you do the cut, you do the blow dry. Right when they turn you around, what's the last thing they do is this.
Poof, poof.
Right? It's the zhuzh. It's the zhuzh. So the hairdo zhuzh works for flowers. I kid you not. It's incredible. You literally just go like this and you go, whoosh. That's it. And you just give it a little zhuzh and then look at it again. And you might see, oh, it zhuzhed into like the place it was supposed to be. Now I got a little bit of a hole over here. I'm going to add one more rose. But it will settle, that last little zhuzh settles everything right where it's supposed to land. And then you do one more kind of circle around. Now, here's the last thing. You always want to, and I should have done this like 10 minutes ago and it's halfway through my arrangement. take a couple steps back halfway through. You want to make sure, the one thing that people do a lot of, I'll always in my classes, I'll have one person that will stand and they're absolutely, they're like, this is going to be the greatest arrangement ever. And they will stand, feet planted on the floor, and they will be hyper tunnel vision. Great. But they'll never turn their vase, which we talked about the importance of, and they'll never take a couple steps back to look at it. What does it look like from over here? From over here, you know, I'm 5 feet tall. If my father-in-law's 6'2" comes, he's going to be looking at it from up here, you know? So you want to make sure that it looks beautiful, not just from that one hyper focused location that you're standing at right now. And listen, you know, as women who are battling, you know, battling cancer, I'm sure you have that in your, you know, you have to look at your life in that way as well. You got to be able to take a step back and look at things from a different view, from a different perspective. Sometimes it's the wide lens. Sometimes you're just taking it minute by minute. And that's how it is with flowers also. You want to be able to see it from the different ways, because you're not always going to be looking at the arrangement from exactly where you're standing at that moment. Just like you guys on your journey, you're not always going to be at this exact stage in it. So you'll be on the other side. You'll be, you know, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now, you'll look back and it's going to be a different perspective. So just having that understanding to really keep that in the perspective, that your current perspective isn't the only one that you're going to have, is really important. So any other questions?
You are getting such positive, a couple of people had to jump off, but you are getting such positive feedback here. I'm getting texts, or they're getting messages and stuff. I guess my question, and I know we're running over by a couple minutes, is when you're starting, you put together those elements that I never would have thought would go together, but how do you choose the right elements that you're going to put together to make something that looks as beautiful as what you picked?
So I'd say if you want to pick 3 things to start, and then you can get creative with the little, you know, stuff that like I talked about. But if you want to go to the store and pick 3 things, I would pick 1, something that's going to be your base flower, a rose, roses are great to start off with. Honestly, I'll tell you, a nice full-headed rose is a great base. But even like my ranunculus today, those were really big and hardy and substantial. A mum will be substantial. That's a good starting point. Then I would do something that's a little bit more fine and delicate, whether it's a tulip, a calla lily, a smaller ranunculus, anemones, daffodils, anything like that. And then I would do some sort of greenery. And that could be anything. That could be foliage, that could be the seeded eucalyptus, that can be something you cut off of a bush in your backyard. And then if you have the ability to get something that's the little bit of funk and interest, like the textural, something that sets it apart. Whether it's the pine cone, whether it's the kumquats in here, whether you do orange slices, whether you do, whatever, but something that just makes it more of a statement piece. That's where I would get started to do something it could even be like ferns, like depending on what the season is, but just things that have a little bit of different scale and a little bit of different texture. Even if it's all the same palette, some people like very monochromatic, that's fine, but make sure you're not doing everything exactly the same scale. Because then it'll give it movement and life, and you can get a little bit of big and a little bit of small.
This was so great. Thank you so much, Samantha. Will you just tell everyone what your website is? Because a few people are asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to send it to you as well. And also, just so you know, anyone who participates in my class, we give a 10% discount for anything you need from me. So if you ever need flowers, if you ever want to do a bloom box, if you ever decide, you know what, all my girlfriends, we're going to do I'm in remission celebratory party and we want to do it virtually or in person, whatever it is, if you're sending a gift, all of that, we'll give you 10% off, and that's indefinitely. So we want to be able to be your go-to. I'll send you a link for that. It'll probably be the name of the event. And I'll send you all of my stuff. But if you want to follow me on Instagram at The Mini Rose Co. And my email is sorry, not my email, my website, www.theminirose.com.